The sky over Chicago today is the exact color of the ash left at the tip of a burnt-out cigar. A biting wind blowing off Lake Michigan rattles hard against the glass window of my office. I am sitting alone in my cabin on the 42nd floor, and there is only one thing resting on my desk: a very ordinary, 20-pound legal-sized piece of white paper. Printed on it are a few black letters, and right at the bottom right corner is a signature in blue ink. The ticking of the clock on my office wall sounds incredibly loud and sharp in this silence. The mug of black coffee on my desk has gone ice cold, but I couldn't care less. My fingers are gently tracing the edges of that white paper. You see, a forensic accountant's fingers feel paper differently. We don't just read the words printed on the pages like most people do. We feel the texture of the document. We measure the distance between two different dates. We look for the things that were intentionally left out, because the truth that is erased from the paper is often the biggest and most authentic story. People usually think that life-shattering moments come with a lot of noise. Hollywood movies and TV shows have brainwashed us into believing that when betrayal strikes, glass shatters, cars collide, people scream their lungs out at each other, and doors are slammed so hard the plaster falls off the walls. People think your world falls apart when someone stands right in front of you, looks you dead in the eye, and threatens to ruin you. But my experience with the world is entirely different. The deepest and most horrifying betrayal of my life arrived in dead silence. Without any noise, without any screaming, and without any drama. That betrayal was served alongside coffee on a beautifully decorated Thanksgiving dining table. It flowed from the expensive blue ink pen held so casually between my father's fingers. True devastation never makes a sound. It creeps in on tiptoe, in the form of legal documents, fake contracts, and signatures manipulated out of you in the name of love, duty, and family. My name is Clara. I am 34 years old and work as a senior forensic accountant at a highly prestigious firm in Chicago. My entire profession revolves around tracking down the money that people cleverly try to hide from the world. When a billionaire businessman sets up offshore shell companies to hide his true wealth during a divorce, I find the real numbers hidden behind those dummy accounts. When a corporate executive embezzles company funds into an offshore account, I trace the digital footprints they thought they had erased. To me, a ledger or a spreadsheet is never just a numbers game. To me, every little receipt, every bank statement, and every invoice tells a story. A story woven out of human greed, selfishness, and fear. I can effortlessly read the numbers that others toss into the trash as garbage. I have an old habit of holding on to every tiny receipt and digital record. I keep a bulletproof account of everything so that it can be proven in court one day. But look at life's cruelest joke. I am the person who can spot the financial lies and deceptions of strangers across the globe in a single glance. Yet I was completely blind to the massive, sickening betrayal orchestrated right in my own home, by my own flesh and blood, for 10 whole years. Why? Because when I look at the world, I look through the sharp, skeptical lens of an auditor. But when I looked at my family, I looked through the eyes of a daughter who just wanted love and acceptance from her parents. And that was the biggest mistake of my life. This single piece of paper on my desk has swallowed 10 years of my life. In one fell swoop, it snatched away the life savings I had painstakingly built by working double and triple shifts through my tough 20s. It stole the days I dragged myself to work with a high fever just to save every single dollar. This paper crushed my dream of buying a quiet home in the suburbs. My peaceful nights of sleep, my peace of mind, and the best years of my youth, rights every person deserves, were devoured like termites by this one blue signature. This paper reduced me to nothing more than a machine in the eyes of my family. A living, breathing ATM with blood in its veins for the very people I considered my whole world. I still remember the first time I saw this document on my computer screen. My hands turned ice cold on the keyboard, and a strange, deafening silence began ringing in my ears, refusing to stop. It felt as though someone had ripped the earth right out from under my feet. I sat frozen at my desk like a statue, while all those nights I spent in freezing hospital waiting rooms and long bank lines flashed before my eyes like a movie. I had killed every joy, every hobby, and every tiny need of mine just so my family wouldn't suffer, so they wouldn't feel any pain. And those people? They were building a massive palace of comfort right on top of my pain and my tears. They had cried to me, saying we were all in the same sinking boat. They had hugged me, telling me that family means sacrificing for each other in bad times. And I believed every single word, because the little girl inside me was still alive, desperate to hear just one sentence from her parents. "We are so proud of our daughter." That innocent little girl paid for that pride with her entire life's earnings. This paper isn't just proof of a commercial property transfer. It is the solid, legal proof that my parents burned their own daughter's life like cheap fuel just to keep their golden boy's life brightly lit. My older brother Julian never had to wonder where next month's apartment rent was coming from. He never had to worry about wearing out his shoes, nor did he ever have to check his bank balance before filling up his car with gas, because my parents made absolutely sure that I paid the price for Julian's every stupidity, every indulgence, and every mistake. And I did, without asking a single question, without a single complaint, just out of a desperate desire to be a good daughter. People often say, time heals all wounds, but when you suddenly discover that the wound wasn't an accident or a mistake, but was inflicted deliberately as part of a cold, calculated plan, that wound never heals. It hardens into a cold, ruthless resolve. Today, I don't feel an ounce of sorrow. Today, I have no tears left. Today, there is only a logical and terrifying calm inside me. The kind of peace that washes over you when you finally realize you are never going to get love from the place you spent your whole life begging for it. Today, on this freezing Chicago morning, the little girl inside me is dead forever. Looking out this window, I am no longer a helpless daughter clinging to the false hope of winning back her family's love. Today, I am nothing but a forensic accountant, and this paper on my desk is my deadliest weapon. It's a loaded gun that makes no sound when the trigger is pulled. There will be no screaming, no long arguments, and none of the typical drama you see when families break apart. I won't call them to demand an explanation. I absolutely won't ask them why they did this to me, because I no longer need any of their lying answers. What I am about to do today will be just like silently pulling the plug on a life support machine. With this one piece of paper, I am going to shatter the web of security they wove over the years in a single stroke. And by the time they realize what has actually hit them, it will be far too late. This will be the quietest and most brutal revenge of a silent daughter. Because when you have rock-solid, federal-level legal documents on your side, you don't need to raise your voice to prove your point. The sheer weight of the evidence is enough to completely crush the other side. But my journey to this piece of paper didn't happen overnight. To understand how I got to this point today, and how my own flesh and blood plotted such a massive conspiracy against me, you have to go back in time with me. You need to understand what was buried in the foundation of that house that turned me into a mere ATM and my brother into a prince. You have to travel with me to my childhood city of Boston, where I first learned to calculate the massive gap between me and my brother Julian, and why I spent my whole life in a futile attempt to bridge it. The posh neighborhood in Boston where I spent the first 18 years of my life looked like something straight off a magazine cover. White picket fences, perfectly manicured lawns, and expensive cars parked in the driveways. From the outside, our family looked like the perfect American dream. My father was a highly successful real estate broker, and my mother was a respected member of the local community board. Both were obsessed with their social image. They cared deeply about what people thought of them. And to maintain this facade, there was a very strict, unspoken rule in our house. It was never written on a wall, but it was breathed into the very air of the home. The rule was, Julian is the prince of this family, and I am the invisible part, only to be acknowledged when they needed something done. Julian was 3 years older than me. He got his blue eyes and blonde hair from my mother. He was the star of his high school football team and the apple of my parents' eyes, the boy who could do no wrong. If Julian failed a test, my father blamed the school system. If Julian broke a neighbor's window, my mother would say the neighbor built the window in the wrong place. The rules of the world simply didn't apply to him. And then there was me, quiet Clara, always reading books, doing her chores, staying out of everyone's way. For me, love in that house was something I had to earn through hard work every single day. And the saddest part was, no matter how hard I worked, my earnings were never enough to make them happy. The math of love and money in our house was incredibly twisted. I still remember my 18th birthday. I had graduated top of my high school class and gotten accepted into the state university. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this was the day I'd finally get the love I had been waiting for. But that evening, sitting at the dining table, my father gave me a long lecture. He told me that I was a grown-up now, and I needed to take responsibility for myself. Nothing in this world is free. He announced they wouldn't be paying my college tuition because it would deprive me of learning life's harsh lessons. He advised me to get a job as a waitress. I kept my head down and accepted it, thinking maybe he was right. Maybe this was all I deserved. But that same year, when Julian turned 21, things were entirely different. On his birthday, my father tossed him the keys to a brand new, expensive sports car. This wasn't his first car either. In the last 3 years, he had totaled 3 expensive cars bought with my parents' money. The first one he crashed into a tree while drunk. The second one he ruined by seizing the engine during a street race. The third he abandoned in Las Vegas to settle a gambling debt. Yet, for all 3 catastrophic mistakes, he never got the lecture I got for simply asking for college tuition. When Julian ruined the third car, my mother just sighed and said, "The poor boy is just trying to find his way in life. We need to support him." That was the moment something broke inside me, or maybe something solidified. I took a job waitressing at a local diner in Boston. I would go to classes in the morning, study in the library in the afternoon, and work at the diner from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. My life shrank down to the smell of stale coffee, burnt grease, and dirty dishes. I scraped strangers' leftovers into the trash and hoarded my tips in a coffee can. I remember the skin on my hands cracking from the hot water and harsh soap. Yet, when I asked my father to lend me $50 for textbooks, he made me write down in a ledger exactly when and with how much interest I would pay him back. Meanwhile, he would write $5,000 checks to Julian's mechanic without batting an eye. There were 2 separate ledgers in that house. One for Julian, where no accounts were ever kept. Money was just handed over. And one for me, where my every breath, every bite of food, and every single dollar was ruthlessly tracked. That ruthless accounting made me the person I am today. When you grow up in a house where your truth is constantly denied, where you're gaslit into thinking you're crazy, you start demanding proof for everything. I lost faith in people because people lie. People change their stories when it suits them. So, I learned to fall in love with numbers. Numbers never lie. 2 plus 2 is always 4, no matter how hard someone tries to spin it. A bank statement doesn't gaslight you and tell you that you're overthinking. A receipt never calls you selfish. They just show the truth. I didn't choose accounting because I loved math. I chose it because I desperately needed something in my life that I could trust blindly. I needed the truth, and I found that truth in numbers. That is exactly why keeping records of every little thing became a borderline obsession for me. I kept every grocery receipt. I filed away every gas station slip, parking ticket, and bank transaction copy in a blue folder. People thought I was highly disciplined, but in reality, it was a deep-seated trauma. It was a scared, insecure girl's way of protecting herself from the world. I was terrified that if someone ever falsely accused me of something, I needed a paper trail to prove my innocence, because I knew that without proof, no one would believe me, not even my own parents. After finishing college, I threw myself entirely into my work. I knew failure wasn't an option. If I fell, there was no one to catch me. I started at a small accounting firm in Chicago, and through sheer grit and a maddening attention to detail, I quickly rose to become a senior forensic accountant. I made a great salary and built a secure life. I had achieved everything on my own merit. But my relationship with my parents and Julian never changed. It ran on a very old, worn-out pattern. They wouldn't call me for months. They didn't care what was happening in my life, or whether I was happy. But whenever my mother or father's name lit up on my phone screen, I could tell without even picking up that they needed money. It started small. Sometimes it was paying off Julian's credit card bill. Other times, they needed a few $1,000s to fix the roof. My mother would always start with that sweet, helpless tone of hers. "Clara, Julian is going through a really rough patch right now. You know he's not as smart as you are. Could you just help us out this one time? We'll pay you back next month." Next month never came, and I never asked for the money back. You probably think I was a complete fool, falling into their trap over and over again despite knowing better. But the truth is, the little girl inside me never really grew up. The one who used to sit on the stairs on Christmas morning, hoping that maybe, just this once, she'd get a big present like Julian did. I was buying their love with that money. I was trying to prove that I was valuable to them too. Whenever they texted me, "Thank you, Clara, we are so proud of you." In exchange for my money, those words hit me like a drug. I would blow months of hard-earned savings just for a fleeting moment of their affection. Julian would launch one business after another, and every single one would tank within months. Sometimes an organic juice shop, sometimes investing in a shady software company, or diving into real estate projects he knew nothing about. And every time he went under, I was pushed to the front lines to bail him out. My father would always say, "Family means being each other's support system." But that support was always a one-way street. I was always the one giving it, and they were always taking it. I knew all of this, yet I stayed quiet. I had convinced myself this was my destiny, that this was all I deserved. But then came that dreadful November, the month that shattered my false peace forever. The moment they took the most horrific advantage of my hunger for their love. It was 2 years ago, the last week of November, Thanksgiving Day. Boston was freezing that year. I had gone to visit my parents for the first time in 3 years. The reason wasn't out of love or family bonding, but a medical emergency. A few months prior, my father had suffered a massive stroke that left the right side of his body paralyzed. Seeing him in that wheelchair was incredibly jarring for me. The man who had ruled over us like a dictator his whole life was now dependent on others, just to lift a soup spoon. Thanksgiving dinner was served on the same heavy mahogany table as always, but the air that night felt different. There was no joking around. Julian wasn't glued to his phone. Instead, he looked incredibly grave and stressed. My mother's face carried an exhaustion I had never seen before. The turkey was getting cold on the plates. Nobody had taken a single bite. And then, My mother started to cry. It wasn't a normal cry. It was perfectly measured and calculated, exactly like actors in a soap opera. She looked at me and grabbed my hand with both of hers. My mother had touched me so rarely in my life that her physical contact sent a shiver down my spine. Through her tears, she said, "Clara, we are completely ruined. The stock market crash over the last few months has swallowed everything we had. Your father's medical bills are in the hundreds of thousands, and the insurance company has washed its hands of it. The bank is going to foreclose on the house next month, the house you grew up in. They're taking it away." And then, Julian chimed in. My brother, who had treated me like a piece of furniture my entire life, actually had tears in his eyes. He said, "Clara, you're the only smart, capable person in this family. I'm just an idiot who has always wasted money. I don't even know how to read these documents. But you do. You're brilliant. You're our last hope. We can't pay for Dad's meds, the mortgage, nothing. If you don't do something, we'll all be out on the street. You're the only smart person in this family. You're our last hope." You can't imagine what those words mean to a girl who has spent her entire life starving to hear that she mattered to her family. In that moment, all my bitterness, my anger, and my grievances melted away in a flash. I felt like I had finally arrived. I had finally beaten Julian. My family had finally acknowledged that I was their savior. I was the strong pillar they could lean on. It was a dangerous, intoxicating high, and I was completely blinded by it. I didn't ask for a single shred of proof that night. Not once did I demand to see the medical bills or the foreclosure notices, things I demand from my clients in the very first meeting. I didn't act like an auditor. I acted like a starving daughter desperate for love. My mother slid a piece of paper with a joint bank account number across the table. She said it was an emergency fund they set up strictly for saving the house and paying for treatment. The second I got back to Chicago, I did what no sane person would ever do. I liquidated my entire retirement fund, the one I had been building since my first day on the job. I took a massive penalty hit, but I didn't care. I dumped every single penny of my life savings into that joint account, nearly $180,000. But it didn't stop there. They had given me a monthly figure to cover my father's medications and the mortgage, $4,500 a month. To send them that much money every month, I had to completely upend my life. I gave up my comfortable downtown apartment that I had painstakingly decorated. Instead, I rented a tiny, damp basement apartment on the outskirts of the city. The only view out my window was of people's feet walking by and car tires. The heater barely worked in the winter, and I slept under 2 heavy quilts. I stopped eating out. I only bought groceries and canned goods that were on the deepest discount. I stopped buying myself new clothes. I even started taking the bus to work to save on gas and parking. On the first of every month, I transferred a massive chunk of my paycheck to that joint account. Hitting that transfer button gave me a strange sense of peace. I felt like a martyr. I was saving my family. When my mother texted me once a month saying, "Thank you, Clara, God bless you," I felt like a queen, even in that miserable basement. I told myself I wasn't selfish like Julian. I was a good daughter. This went on for 2 whole years, 24 months. 24 times I transferred my money into that joint account. I worked day and night, took on overtime, and wrung myself dry like a machine just so my parents back in Boston wouldn't suffer. I assumed Julian was working some odd job to chip in too. I never dared ask them how much he was contributing, fearing it would seem selfish and petty during such a difficult time. But the reality was drastically different. The reality was nothing like the sob story I was fed at that Thanksgiving table. The crying, the helplessness, the drama. It was all a masterclass in acting, a script that had been written long before. And I was the one gullible audience member who spent her entire life savings buying a ticket to their fake show. The horrifying truth came to light when a minor slip-up from my mother handed me the one clue she never should have given me. A clue a normal person might have brushed off, but one that could never escape the eyes of a forensic accountant. The unraveling began this April during tax season. As an accountant, doing my own taxes takes me barely any time because my records are immaculate. I was sitting at a tiny desk in my damp basement apartment, working on my return, when an email from my mother popped up. She had forwarded me a PDF file. The email read, "Clara, here's the bank statement. You might need it to report the interest from the joint account for your taxes." It was a very ordinary request. She had sent the annual statement for the joint account where I dumped half my salary every month. Without overthinking it, I opened the file on my computer. I just wanted to glance at the pages logging my transfers. But as I scrolled down, my eyes snagged on a very tiny transaction. It was near the bottom of the third page. It wasn't a massive amount, just $285.50. Most people would assume it was groceries or a utility bill and ignore it. But my eyes don't work like that. My brain instantly went into analysis mode. The transaction was made out to the King County Recorder's Office, Washington. Why on earth would an allegedly bankrupt elderly couple living in Boston be paying a $285 fee to a government office in Seattle, Washington? And out of an account strictly earmarked for medical bills and saving their home? The auditor in me, who had been sleeping behind the emotional daughter for 2 years, snapped awake. My hands, which had been resting casually, suddenly flew across the keyboard. In the dead silence of that basement, only the rapid clicking of my mouse echoed. I immediately pulled up the King County Public Property Records database. In America, anyone can look up property records if they know exactly what to search for. I typed my parents' names into the search bar. The buffering icon spun on the screen. Those few seconds felt like centuries, and then the search results populated. Right in front of me was a full legal document, a deed of trust and a property transfer tax form. I downloaded the file, zoomed in, and started reading. It was a massive commercial property right in the heart of Seattle. A plaza filled with retail stores and offices. The market value of that property was easily between $7 and $8 million. I didn't even know my parents owned a property that big in Seattle. But the part that ripped the ground out from under me wasn't the existence of the property. It was 2 critical details written on the deed. The first was the date. The property was transferred into an offshore trust exactly 2 weeks before that Thanksgiving dinner. The same dinner where my mother sat weeping, claiming they were entirely bankrupt. They had lied to my face. They were never bankrupt. When my father had his stroke and realized his medical bills were going to be astronomical, they cleverly transferred their most valuable asset into a trust to hide it from the government and creditors. The second detail punched a hole in my chest that nothing will ever fill. The sole beneficiary of that offshore trust was my brother, Julian. I sat frozen like stone in the blue glow of my monitor. Every single word, every tear, and every emotion from that Thanksgiving night replayed in my mind like a movie. Julian telling me, "You're our last hope, Clara." My mother grabbing my hands. It was all a script. They had hidden their multi-million-dollar asset to completely secure Julian's future, but they needed someone flush with cash to cover their daily medical bills and the Boston mortgage. And for that, they chose me. They bled my retirement dry, stole my sleep, and crushed my future just so Julian's multi-million-dollar inheritance wouldn't suffer a scratch. I sat on the freezing floor of that basement while every penny I made was funneled into that joint account, while my brother was made the owner of a trust large enough to fund a lifetime of luxury without him ever having to lift a finger. They didn't pick me because I was smart, or because I was their last hope. They picked me because, to them, I was entirely disposable. I was the cheap brick they used to shore up Julian's castle, one they were perfectly fine crushing to dust. I thought I would burst into tears. I thought I would pick up the phone right then and scream at my mother for what she had done to me. But strangely, not a single tear fell. There was no urge to scream. The grief and bitterness I should have felt were instantly replaced by a cold, logical, and terrifying calm. It's the exact calm a forensic accountant feels when they finally lock onto the last piece of a massive fraud puzzle. I turned on my printer and printed out the pages of the deed of trust. As the printer spat out the pages one by one, I collected them. These weren't just papers. They were my Emancipation Proclamation. They were the evidence that killed the starving, desperate daughter inside me forever. I placed the documents in a red folder. Red, because it was a hazard sign. For them. For the next week, I worked in absolute silence. I audited every single transaction in that joint account, every receipt from the last 2 years, and every legal loophole in Julian's trust. I pulled all the documents, downloaded all the tax forms, and compiled a file that would send them straight to federal prison the second a judge or tax official laid eyes on it. I gathered airtight proof of medical fraud, hiding assets from the government, and tax evasion. I didn't call them. I even transferred the $4,500 into the joint account that month so they wouldn't suspect a thing. I wanted them completely relaxed. I wanted them to believe their idiot daughter was still securely caught in their trap. Because when you plan to destroy your enemy, you never let them know you're right behind them. I was waiting for Christmas. Because they robbed me on Thanksgiving, I was going to pay them back with interest on Christmas Day. And it was going to be a debt they would never recover from in their lifetime. Christmas morning in my tiny Chicago basement apartment was colder and quieter than usual. Outside, a blanket of white snow was falling, and aside from the faint hum of my space heater, the room was dead silent. I set 4 coffee mugs on the table. They were coming from Boston to visit me today. My mother had said over the phone that they didn't want me to be alone for Christmas, but I knew exactly why they were really coming. They weren't here to see me. They were coming to get my signature on a brand new blank check. Around 1 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened the door. My father had graduated from his wheelchair to a cane. My mother was draped in a gorgeous, expensive cashmere shawl, and Julian, the leather jacket he was wearing cost more than 3 months' rent for my basement. They walked in, and I could clearly read the disgust in their eyes as they took in my cramped, damp home. My mother wrinkled her nose and said, "Clara, how do you live in such a tiny place? I can barely breathe in here." I didn't reply. I just motioned for them to sit on the sofa. I poured the coffee. They all looked incredibly awkward. They were only here for one reason and were desperately looking for an opening to bring it up. Finally, my mother slipped into her sweet church lady tone. She put her half-empty mug down, looked at me with faux affection, and said, "Clara, Julian has drafted an incredible business plan. It's a tech startup that could turn into a multi-million-dollar company overnight. But to show the investors, he needs some initial seed money." Right on cue, Julian pulled a crisp white envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table toward me. My mother continued, "We know how much you care about us. You have a fantastic credit score. If you just sign these personal loan papers as a co-signer, it'll change Julian's life. It's just a formality, Clara. It's what family does. You won't have to pay a single penny, we just need your name. We're all one family, aren't we? We're all one family, aren't we?" Those words used to melt me to my core. Today, they sounded like a cheap, tasteless joke. I sat perfectly still. I didn't touch the envelope, and my eyes were completely dry. I was looking at them the way a scientist studies a venomous insect under a microscope. My silence started making them nervous. Julian started bouncing his knee, his old tell whenever he was lying. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. Then I reached out, slid the unopened envelope right back to Julian. Immediately after, I stood up, pulled the red folder from my desk drawer, walked over, and dropped it dead center on the table between the three of them. I flipped it open, pulled out the King County property transfer form, and laid it right in front of my father. I kept my voice completely flat and professional, exactly how I speak during a corporate fraud deposition. I said, Seattle, Washington, a $7.7 million commercial property, transferred to an offshore trust exactly 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and the sole beneficiary of that trust is Julian. The same Julian whose new startup you're asking me to take out another loan for today. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped below zero, the color completely drained from my father's face. Julian's knee stopped bouncing, his mouth hanging wide open. My mother, who never found herself at a loss for words, suddenly started stammering. Clara, what are you talking about? You're misunderstanding things? That property belonged to someone else? I held up my hand and cut her off. I don't want your excuses, Mom, I said. I am not a child. You can shut up with a fabricated bedtime story. I am a forensic accountant. I track down money people bury on the other side of the ocean. You played me for a fool, thinking I was so starved for love I'd never check the paperwork. You were right about that, but you grossly miscalculated what I'd do once that starvation ended. My father gripped his cane tightly, his voice shifting to angry and defensive. That was family money, Clara. We had to protect our future. The government would have seized everything. Julian needed a safety net. You can take care of yourself. Everything you did for this family, and we're grateful, but that property was ours. I looked him dead in the eye and said, That property was yours, Dad, but the $180,000 I drained from my retirement fund was mine. The $4,500 I sent you every single month for the last 24 months so Julian's multi-million-dollar inheritance would stay safe. That was mine. You mortgaged my life so your son could walk around in that leather jacket. Julian shot up furious. So what are you gonna do, Clara? Sue us? Sue your own family? You don't even have enough money left to pay a lawyer. I looked at Julian with a faint smile. You still don't get it, Julian, I said. I'm not paying a dime to any lawyers. I just did my job. I've already submitted a comprehensive report to the IRS and the State Medicaid Fraud Division. That report includes every piece of evidence in this red folder, every bank transaction, and the full details of all the assets you hid from the medical insurance companies. I watched sheer terror wash over all three of their faces simultaneously. My mother's hands began to shake. I finished my thought calmly. I detailed exactly how you hid your multi-million-dollar assets to evade medical bills. In America, they call that Medicaid fraud and tax evasion. This isn't a civil suit, Dad. It's a federal crime. The investigation has already begun. And because I filed the information as a whistleblower, I am legally fully protected from any fallout of this fraud. My father's cane clattered to the floor. My mother started sobbing, but this time, there was no acting. It was the wail of someone who realized for the first time that there was nowhere left to run. Julian lunged forward and tried to rip up the red folder. I didn't stop him. You can tear that up, Julian, I said. I have multiple encrypted digital backups, and the original copies are sitting on the desks of federal investigators right now. I tapped a button on my phone and showed them the screen. Oh, and by the way, I permanently canceled all automatic transfers from that joint account this morning. I have legally severed myself from all of your financial and familial decisions. I have no relationship with you anymore. Not by blood, and not on paper. I walked over and opened the door to my apartment, letting the freezing air rush in. In a cold, crystal-clear voice, I said, You can leave my home now. I have a new life to start next week, and I need time to pack. My mother walked up to the door and reached out to touch my shoulder. Through her tears, she pleaded, Clara, we are your parents. You can't send us to jail. I gently brushed her hand off my shoulder. I didn't send you to jail, Mom, I said. I just submitted an accurate ledger to the government. Numbers never lie. You treated me like a machine. Machines don't understand relationships. They only settle accounts. Today, our accounts are settled." The three of them walked out into the snowstorm without saying another word. Julian's shoulders were slumped in defeat, and my father could barely walk even with the help of his cane. I shut the door and locked it. The basement was just as freezing as always, but for the first time in 10 years I felt a deep, profound warmth and peace radiating inside me. The coffee mug on my tiny desk was still slightly warm, and the torn pages from the red folder were scattered across the floor. I swept them up and threw them in the trash. I didn't need those papers anymore. My job was done. The shift in my life after that Christmas was nothing short of miraculous. The next few months were an endless waking nightmare for my parents and Julian. The IRS and State Fraud Division investigations moved with terrifying speed. When the government finds out they've been cheated out of massive tax revenues, they show absolutely no mercy. Julian's offshore trust was seized. All of his bank accounts were frozen solid. The house in Boston, the one they stole my life savings to protect, ended up being foreclosed on anyway, because they no longer had the money to even cover their exorbitant legal fees. My father was hit with crushing fines, and whatever social standing they had left was completely dragged through the mud. How do I know all this? Because I read the updates in the county's public records and the legal notices in the newspapers. I never called them, and they never bothered calling me. Honestly, they couldn't reach me even if they tried, because the very day after Christmas I changed my phone number. I permanently deleted the old email account where I used to get Julian's credit card statements. I don't live in that damp Chicago basement anymore. I left that city behind for good. Today, I am sitting in my very own house in a gorgeous, quiet neighborhood in Colorado. There's no smog or city traffic noise outside these windows. Just beautiful, snow-capped mountains. I didn't buy this house with anyone's charity or a joint account. I bought it with the hard-earned money I fought to get back from their clutches. There are still plenty of legal-sized white papers sitting on my desk, but they no longer tell the story of someone else's greed. Now I use these papers to get justice for my clients. I learned a massive lesson through this entire ordeal. When your own flesh and blood betrays you, when your family weaponizes your emotions against you, you don't need to stoop to their level to fight back. You don't need to scream at them or demand explanations, because people who betray you will always have a fabricated story ready to justify their actions. You can never win against their stories, but you can absolutely destroy them with their paperwork. The right documents, airtight proof, and a profound silence are a woman's greatest and deadliest weapons. You just have to keep your ledgers perfectly accurate. Time and the law will handle the rest. If you are listening to me tonight, and you too have been pushed into the dark abyss of betrayal by the people closest to you, I just want to tell you this. You are not alone. You are not something disposable to be used and thrown away. You have the power to write your own story on the blank pages of your life, entirely on your own terms. Just hold on to your evidence and let your silence become your absolute power. Let me know in the comments if you've ever watched the true colors of a loved one get exposed on paper. I read every single one of your comments. And if this quiet but true story touched your heart today, make sure to like and subscribe to BookBite Studio so I can keep bringing you more untold stories just like this one.